shall believe in the one God, in his angelic messengers and his revealed books, in his human messengers, in the last day or resurrection and final judgment, and in the determination of God, of good and evil by God. On the same occasion, he explained as to what signifies submission to God in practice and what is the best method of obedience. Best method of God. Muslims have nothing in common with atheists, polytheists, or those who associate others with the one God. The Arabic word for one God is Allah, Lord and Creator of the universe. Even the simplest, primitive, and uncultured man knows well that one cannot be the creator of one's own self, and that there ought to be a creator of us all, of the entire universe. Atheism and materialism does not respond to this logical need. To believe in polytheism will entail the difficulty of division of power between several gods. If not a civil war among them, one can easily see that everything in the universe is interdependent. Man, for instance, requires the aid of plants, metals, animals, and stars. Just as each one of those objects needs another's help in some way or another, the division of divine powers just become impracticable. In their praiseworthy solitude, in their praiseworthy solicitude for not attributing evil to God, certain things have thought of two different gods, a god of good and a god of evil. But the question is whether the two would act in mutual accord, or would there arise conflicts between them. In the first case, the duality becomes redundant and superfluous. And if the God of good consents to evil, then he would even become an accomplice in that evil, thus vitiating the very purpose of the duality. In the second case, one would have to admit that the God of evil would be more often victorious and obtain the upper hand should one believe than in the weakling. The God of good as God. Moreover, evil is a relative thing. With regard to one, if something is evil, then the same thing becomes a good with regard to another person. And since absolute evil does not exist, there is no attribution of the evil to God. Monotheism alone, pure and unmixed, can satisfy reasons. God is one, though he is capable of doing all sorts of things, hence the multiplicity of his attributes. God is not only the creator but also the master of all. He rules over the heavens and the earth, and nothing moves without his knowledge and his permission. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has said that God has 99 most beautiful names and for 99 principal attributes. He is the creator, the essence of the existence of all, wise, just, merciful, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, determinant of everything, to whom belongs life, death, resurrection, etc. It follows then that the conception of God differs according to an individual. A philosopher does not envisage it in the same manner as a man in the street. The Prophet Muhammad admired the fervor of the faith of simple folk, the simple man, and often gave the example of the faith of an old woman that is unshakable and full of sincere conviction. The beautiful little story of the elephant and a group of blind men is well known. Elephant and a group of blind men. There had never been before heard of an elephant. So, on his arrival, each of them approached the strange animal and laid his hand on its trunk, another on its ear, and a third on its leg, a fourth on its tail, another on its tusks. Upon their return, each one exchanged impressions and described the elephant in his own manner and personal experience. For example, that it was like a column, like a wing, something hard like stone, and soft and slender. Everyone was right, yet none had found the whole truth which lay beyond his perspective ability. If we replace the blind man of this parable by searches of the invisible God, we can easily realize the relative veracity of individual experiences. As certain mystics of early Islam have observed, there is a truth about God not to the man in the street, another known to the initiated, yet another to the inspired prophets, and the one lastly the one known to God Himself. In the expose given above on the authority of the Prophet ﷺ of Islam, there is enough elasticity in order to satisfy the needs of different categories of man, learned as well as ignorant, intelligent as well as simple, poets, artists, jurists, mystics, theologians, and the rest. The point of view and the angle of vision may differ according to the individual, yet the object of vision remains constant. Muslim servants have constructed their entire system on a judicial basis, where rights and duties are correlative. God has given us the organs and, faculties which we process, and every gift implies on a particular obligation. To worship God, to be thankful to Him, to obey Him, to shun all that does not suit His universal divinity. All these constitute an individual duties of each person, for which each person shall be personally responsible. The God, Rabbul Alameen. The angels. God being invisible and beyond all physical perception, it was necessary to have some means of contact between man and God, otherwise it would be possible to follow the divine will. God is the creator not only of our bodies but also of all our faculties, which are diverse and each capable of developing. It is He who has given us intuition, moral conscience, and means to guide us in the right path. The human spirit is capable of both good and evil inspirations. Among the common folk, it is possible that good people receive sometimes evil inspirations, temptations, that according, and bad people good inspirations. Inspirations can come from someone other than God also, such as evil suggestions which come from the devil. It is the grace of God which enables our reason to distinguish between that which is celestial and worthy of following, and that which is diabolic and fit to be shunned. There are ways to establish contact and or communication between man and God. How is that possible? The best would have been incarnation, but Islam has rejected it. It would be too degrading for a transcendent God to become man, to eat, drink, be tortured by His own creations, and even be put to death. However close a man may approach God in his journey towards Him, even in his highest ascensions, man remains man and is very much remote from God. Many may annihilate himself like the mystics and efface his personality completely in order to act according to the will of God. But still, and let us repeat that man remains man. Point to be made. Man remains man, subject to all his weaknesses, and God is above all these insufficiencies. Among other means of communication, man and God, which are at the disposal of man, perhaps the feeblest is a dream, according to the Prophet ﷺ. Good dreams are suggested by God and guide man in the right direction. Another means is ilka. Ilka is literally throwing something towards something. Ilka, like guidance or something, if I understand correctly. A kind of auto-suggestion or intuition, or of presentiment of solution in case of impasses in or insoluble or difficult problems. There is also the ilham, which may be translated as divine inspiration. Ilham is literally throwing something to someone. Ilham means to be translated as divine inspiration. Things are suggested to the heart, mind of a man whose soul is sufficiently developed in the virtues of countries have enjoyed this grace. When someone devotes oneself to God and tries to forget, flesh is like lightning in which one understands without effort that which no other effort would thus enlighten. Then there is a sentiment of conviction, contentment and realization of truth. It is God who guides him and controls him and his thoughts as well as his actions. Even the prophets, the human messengers of God, get this kind of direction among others. Nevertheless, there remains the possibility of error of judgment or of comprehension on the part of men. The mythics affirm that sometimes even the most pious of men are led astray by their imperceptible ego, not being able to distinguish base inspiration that come as a divine trial. The highest degree of contact, the surest and the most infallible means of communication between man and his creator is called Wahi. Wahi by the Prophet ﷺ. This is not an ordinary inspiration, but a veritable revelation made to man from God. A celestial communication. Man is met, but on the contrary, God is even above the spirit and therefore beyond all possibility of direct physical contact with man. God is omnipresent, and as the Quran says, nearer to man than his jugular vein, which is there. Yet no physical contact is possible, therefore it is a malak, a messenger like Jibreel alayhi salam. That is a celestial messenger bearer, commonly translated as angel, who serves an intermediary or the channel of transmission of the God's message to his human agent or messenger. None except a prophet receives such a revelation, though the intermediary of a celestial messenger. It ought to be remembered that in Islam, prophet does not mean one who makes prophecies and predictions, but only an envoy of God, a bearer of divine message intended for his people. As to the angel, it does not enter in the scope of our studies here to discuss whether it is a spiritual being distinct from the material beings in the universe, or something else. According to the Quran, the celestial messenger who brought revelation to the Prophet is called Jibreel, which etymologically means the power of God. The Quran cites also Mikael without indicating his functions. The functionary in charge of hell is named Malik. Malik al-Maut, if we pronounce this. It also speaks of the angels without name and without attributes, all of whom execute the orders of the Lord. The Islamic belief of that Jibreel, also described in the Quran as a trustworthy spirit, Al-Ruh Al-Amin, stands above all. In the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, as distinct from the Quran, we read that this celestial messenger Jibreel did not always appear in the same form to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said him sometimes like a being suspended in the air, sometimes in the shape of a man, sometimes like a being having wings. In a narration preserved by Ibn Hanbal, it is reported that one day, in the presence of many people, an unknown person came and put some question to the Prophet ﷺ and then went away. Several days afterwards, the Prophet told his companions, I am persuaded to believe that the person who put to me questions on that day was none other than Jibreel, who had come to teach you your religion, and never was I so tardy in recognizing him. It was so because he had come to examine the Prophet and not to communicate to him some message from God. The way in which revelation used to come could be detected from the following reports, in which the Prophet ﷺ himself or his onlookers have described it. Sometimes it came to me like the beating sound of the bell, and this is the hardest experience of me. And when that ceases, I retain well engraved in my memory that all that it has said. But sometimes the angel appears to me in the shape of a human being and speaks to me, and I retain what he says. In the transmission of Ibn Hanbal, this same report reads, I hear the beating sounds, and thereupon I keep silent. There is not an occasion of the revelation to me when I do not fear that my soul will depart. His companions relate their observations. Whenever a revelation came to him, a sort of rest, immobility captured him. Or whenever the revelation came to the messenger of God, he was overwhelmed and remained in a state a while as if he was intoxicated. Or the revelation came to him in the coldest day, and when it seized the front of the Prophet ﷺ, perspired with sweat falling as pearls. Once the moments of revelation arrived, he bent his head inside a state of vanished, inside a calm and the face of Messenger of God had become red, and he snored. Later the state vanished. Whenever the revelation came, he suffered therefrom, and his face darkened. When the revelation came to him, we heard near him like the humming sound of bees. Hanbal and Abu Humayra. Professor Aslam suffered great pain when the revelation came to him, and he used to move his lips. Bukhari. Another series of reports said that he then felt the weight of a great load and said, I saw the Prophet ﷺ while he was on his camel when a revelation came to him. The camel began to foam with rage and twist its legs to the point that I fear that there would break with a crack. In fact, sometimes the camel sat down, but sometimes it would obstinately try to stand with legs planted like pegs. Although the time of revelation ended, this lasted until the state of revelation then vanished, and sweat would fall from him like pearls. Ibn Sa'd. The Lord almost broke the legs of camel with a crack. Zayd ibn Abid reports his personal experience of a certain day in the following words: his leg lay on the thigh and the weight is so heavy that I feared that my femur would break with a crack. In another version, there is in this edition, had not been for the Prophet ﷺ to God, I would have pushed Akra and taken away my leg. Other reports say the revelation came to him once while he was standing on the pulpit of the mosque, and he remained immobile. Or he was holding a loaf of meat during his meal when a revelation came to him, and when the state seized, the loaf was still in his hands. In such occasions, the Prophet ﷺ sometimes lay on his back, sometimes the imitates even covered his face in respect with a piece of cloth. As the circumstances may be, yet he never lost his consciousness or nor control of himself. In the early times of the mission, he used to repeat aloud during the course of the revelation what was revealed to him, but while still in Mecca, he abandoned this habit of simultaneous repeating, but remained silent until the end of the state of revelation, and then he communicated the message of God to his secretaries of note, as is mentioned in the Quran. Still not thy tongue habits to hasten it upon us, the putting together and the reading thereof, and again, and hasten not with the Quran ere its revelation hath been perfected unto thee, and say, my Lord, increase me in knowledge. And when the Prophet returned to his normal state, he used to dedicate to his scribes the portion of the Quran which had just been received by him, in order to publish it amongst the Muslims and to multiply the copies. In his Al-Maghazi, MS of Ibn Ishaq reports that no part of the Quran was revealed to the Messenger of God ﷺ. He first recited it among men and then among women. The revealed books. It is duty of a man to obey God, being the Lord of earth as well as the heavens, more so because in His mercy He sent His messengers of belief of men. God is the sovereign and the source of all law, spiritual as well as temporal. We have just spoken of the revelation and communication of the will of God to men. It is the collection and compilation of these revelations which constitute the revealed books. The formula of the creed enunciated by the Prophet speaks of the books, not merely of the book which would refer to the Quran only. This tolerance is characteristics of his teachings. The Quran speaks of it in numerous passages. For instance, 2 and 25. Each one of the Muslims believed in God and His angels and His books and His messengers, and says, we make no distinction between any of His messengers. It declares, and there is not a nation but one hath passed among them. And yet again, verily we sent messengers before thee, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, among them those of whom we have told thee, and some of them we have not told thee about. The Quran names and recognized the scrolls of Abraham and the Torah of Moses and the Pastor of David and the Gospel of Jesus as the books of revealed by God. It is true that there is no trace today of the scrolls of Abraham. One knows that the sad story of the Torah of Moses and how it was destroyed by pagans several times. The same fate befell the Psalter. As for Jesus, he had not had the time to compile and dedicate what he preached. It was his disciples and his successors who gleaned his utterances and transmitted them to the poster in a number of recensions. A critical revision of the text, of which at least 70 recensions of the Gospel are known, and with the exception of 4, all are declared by the Church to be apocryphal. Be that as it may, the dogma for every Muslim is to believe not only in the Quran but also in the collections of divine revelation of pre-Islamic epochs. The Prophet ﷺ did not mention Buddha or nor Zoroaster, nor the founders of Indian Brahminism. So Muslims are not authorized to affirm categorically the divine character of instance of Avesta of the Hindu Vedas. Nonetheless, they cannot firmly reject either the possibility of the Vedas or Avesta have been originally based divine revelation, nor having suffered a fate similar to that of the Pentateuch of the Moses. The same is true in connection with what happens with what appertains to China, Greece, and the other lands. The messengers of God. Prophets. An angel brings the message of God to a chosen man. It is the letter who is charged with its communication to the people. In Quranic terminology, this human agent of the message is called the Nabi, Rasul, the messenger, Nabi, which translates to prophet, Mursal, envoy, Bashir, announcer, Nazir, warner. Prophets are men of great piety and models of good behavior. Spiritual as well as temporal and social miracles are not necessary for them, although history attributes miracles to all of them, and they themselves have always affirmed that it is not they but God who did that. It is their teaching alone which is the criterion of their veracity. According to the Quran, there were certain prophets who had received the revelation of divine books, and there were others who did not receive new books but had to follow the books revealed to their predecessors. The divine messages do not disagree of fundamental truths such as the oneness of God and the demand of doing good and abstaining from evil. Yet they may differ with regards to the rules of social conduct in accordance with the social evolution attained by people. If God has sent successive prophets, then that is a proof that precious directions have been abrogated and replaced by new ones. And except for these latter certain of the old rules tactically or explicitly retained, certain prophets were given a divine mission of educating members of a single house, tribe, or clan, or of a single race, or of a single region, whereas others had vaster missions, embracing the entire humanity and extending all over time. The Quran expressly mentions certain prophets such as Adam, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, David, Moses, Salih, Hud, Jesus, John, the and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Peace be all upon all of them. But the Quran is explicitly that there were also others before Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was the seal and the last of the messengers of God. Subhanallah. The scatology. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has also demanded belief in the doomsday, the Qiyamah, the day of man will be revived after his death, and God will judge him on the basis of his deeds during the life of this world, in order to reward his good actions and punish him for the evil ones. One day our universe will be destroyed by the order of God, and then, after a certain lapse of time, He who had created us first will bring us back to life. Paradise as a reward and hell as a punishment are but graphic terms to make us understand a state of things which is beyond all nations of our life in this world. The Quran says, no soul knew what is kept hid from them, or joy is a reward for what they have used to do. God promised to the believers man and woman gardens underneath which rivulets flow, wherein they will abide, blessed dwellings in gardens of Eden, and the pleasure of God is grandeur. Still, that is the supreme triumph. So this pleasure on his part is over and above even the gardens of Eden. In yet another passage of Quran we read, for those who do good is what is the best and more. Al-Bukhari Muslim reports that the Prophet used to refer to this verse saying that after paradise there would be the vision of God, the ultimate reward of the pious. As far as paradise is concerned, an oft quoted utterance of the Prophet ﷺ is, God says, I have prepared to my pious slaves things in paradise, the like of which no eye has ever seen, no ear ever heard, no even human heart, mind, or even thought of. As to what is beyond paradise, Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, and other great sources record an important saying of the Prophet ﷺ. When the people left in paradise will have entered it, God will tell them, ask me what else can I add to you. People will wonder, having been honored, given paradise and saved from hell, and will not know what to ask. Thereupon God will remove the veil, and nothing would be lovelier than gazing at the God. Subhanallah, Subhanallah, Subhanallah. In another version of instead of the veil, hijab, the crab of grandeur. In other words, the opportunity of contemplating God would be the highest and the real reward of the other world. It is the light of this authoritative interpretation. One should read what the Quran and Hadith unceasingly describe for the common man with regard to the joys of paradise and the horrors of hell, in terms which remind us for our surroundings in the world. There are gardens and rivers of canals in paradise. There are young and beautiful girls. There are carpets and luxurious garments, pearls, precious stones, fruits, wine, and all the man would desire. Similarly, in the hell is fire. There are serpents, boiling water, and the torches. There are bars that are extremely cold, and in spite of these suffering, there will be no death to remove them. All this is easily explained when one thinks of the vast majority of men, of the common masses to whom the divine message is addressed. It is necessary to speak to everyone according to his capacity of understanding and of intelligence. One day, when the Prophet ﷺ was speaking to the company of faithful about paradise and its pleasures, including its flying horses, a pigeon rose and put the question, "Will there be camels also?" The Prophet smiled gently and replied, "There will be everything that one would desire." The Quran speaks of paradise and hell simply a means of persuading the average man to lead a just life and to march in the path of truth. It attaches no importance to details, whether describe a place or a state of things. That should not interest us either, for a Muslim believes in them without asking how. It goes without saying that paradise will be eternal. Once meriting it, there would be no questions of being rejected from it. The Quran assures us pain will not touch them and there is no expulsion from it. Some would enter it forthwith, while others would suffer longer or shorter periods of detention in hell before meriting paradise. But the question is whether hell is eternal or for the unbelievers. The opinions of the Muslim theologians have differed on those points, although a great majority of them affirm on the basis of the Quranic verses that God may pardon every sin and every crime except disbelief in God, which is shirk, and that the punishment that would be meted out for this last sin would be the eternal. Others opine that even the punishment of disbelief may one day be terminated by the grace of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These theologians deduce their opinions also from the certain verses of the Quran. We need not pursue further this discussion but the hopes of God's unlimited mercy. Amen. Predestination and free will. In this expose, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has lastly demanded the belief that the determination, the qadr, all the good and evil, all the good and is from God. Does this phrase signify that everything is predestined for man, or does the statement merely imply that the qualifications of good and evil in a given act depends on God? In other words, nothing is good or evil in itself by itself only because God has declared it to be so, and man has nothing to do but observe it. In fact, there is a dilemma of the theologian. If we declare that man is responsible for his acts, it would be incompatible with the predestinations of his acts. Similarly, if we declare that the man is free in his acts, then this would imply that God has neither power over nor the knowledge of what man is doing to do in his worldly life. The two alternatives create an embarrassment. One would like to attribute to God not only justice but also omnipotence and omniscience. The Prophet ﷺ ridicules this discussion, which will remain inconclusive, and he has formally ordered his adherents not to engage in it, adding, "People before you have been led astray by this decision." He recognizes for God in all respect and reverence and attributes of omnipotence, omniscience, and also affirm that the man will be held responsible for his acts. He does not want to tie up one of those things with the other. In a way, he regulates that he regulates this discussion to the level of futility of knowing whether the hen came first or the egg. Moreover, good and evil are relative terms. In a tiger hunts a rabbit for food. What is good? Sustenance. For one is evil death, for the other question. That is why the evil that seems to teach us in on account of our own nature, which merits or requires that evil. That is also why it is for God to determine for whom a given act is good and for whom a given act is evil. Furthermore, it should be remembered that the conception of responsibility is a trustworthy thing, whereas the divine reward and punishment belong to the otherworldly matters. We are shocked only when we relegate them both to the same level. To do so would be a fallacy. Let us remember that it is this double belief in the omnipotence of God and the absolute individual responsibility of a man which rouses a Muslim to action, even if it enables him to support easily and unavoidably misfortunes. Far from creating in him an immobility, it gives him a dynamism. We have to refer to the exploits of the early Muslims who were the best practitioners of the teachings of Prophet ﷺ. In order to convince ourselves of the truth of this statement, we must understand that. Conclusion. This is a resume practically of all that a Muslim has to believe. The whole formula of the creed is succinctly summed up in these two expressions. There is no God if not God himself, and Muhammad is the messenger and slave servant of God, which I believe translated to La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This would serve to remind us that Islam is not only a belief but also a practice, spiritual as well as temporal. It is in fact a complete code of human life. Ya Rabbal Alamin, Astaghfirullah Al-Azim.